Hi guys, welcome back aboard good old Athena. This week we have yet more improvements on the to-do list. There's going to be a fun mix. We'll have a little bit of electronics, some wiring, a little bit of painting, tiny bit of fairing. There's going to be a little something for everyone. My name is Mess, this is my wife Ava. I've spent the last 5 years on a somewhat extensive refit of our 1987 Warrior 38 named Athena. That was a DIY fun-packed adventure complete with a very extensive osmosis treatment, building a new rudder using vacuum infusion, rebuilding the entire deck, gutting and subsequently rebuilding most of the interior, painting the top sides, and a ton of other projects. The summer of 2021 we started cruising full time. Now we're finally ready to begin our adventure. Let's jump right in and get started on the painting and fairing portion of the to-do list, and that is to paint the doors and the washboards. Here are our new washboards, and as you can see by the old one here, well, I think it's about time for an upgrade. Now the new ones here, they look an awful lot like MDF, but they're not MDF. This stuff is called tricoya. We made these washboards in James' amazing workshop in Chichester this winter, and this stuff is guaranteed for, I believe it's 50 years above ground and 25 years when below ground. So for washboards, I think it's going to be perfectly fine. I'm going to reuse this old hardware from the old washboards just because I haven't been able to find anything better. But yeah, we're also going to be painting the doors. Here aboard Athena we have two doors, one leading into the forward cabin and another one leading into the head. Unfortunately, the door leading into the head is going to require a little bit more than just painting. Both of the doors are made out of the same 18mm plywood, but the one going into the head has a very rough surface on the inside of the door. I don't know how well it's going to show up on camera, but there is a bunch of texture to the surface here, and well, we don't want that. I'm not going for ultimate perfection with this paint job, but a paint job can never become better than the prep work you put into it. And with a surface like the one on the inside of the door there, it's just going to be more difficult to keep that surface clean. So I think it's well worth it to just fair out those imperfections. I'm going to be using the exact same products for the doors that I've used for the rest of the interior. So that means priming with Interprotect and then Perfection Undercoat as a top coat. Now Perfection Undercoat is actually the primer for Perfection Pro, which is what I use to paint the hull with. Perfection Undercoat is nowhere near as glossy as Perfection Pro, but for the interior of the boat I think it is perfect and well suited. When I prime the plywood doors, the texture of the wood is going to rise up, and I don't want that texture to be visible in the final paint job. So I'm going to be sanding in between the coats of primer, and while I do that, that's going to be the perfect time to just fair out those little imperfections. That way we cut down a little bit on the sanding and we don't get as much glorious man glitter inside of the boat. Although not ideal, I decided to leave the doors on the hinges while painting them. There's not really enough space for me to put them anywhere else. I removed the door handle and masked off around both of the doors. This is where we get into the disclaimer portion of the video. I couldn't find my respirator. I know I've got one here on the boat with the right filters, but it's being very elusive. So don't do what I'm doing here. This is a two-part paint and the fumes are horrendous. Fortunately, there's pretty good airflow going through the boat, so the smell isn't too bad. It took a little bit longer than expected for the paint to cure, but we're finally ready for sanding and fairing. When I mentioned the grain of the wood rising, this is what I was talking about. You guys of course can't feel this, but this surface is kind of rough. Down here is a much worse example. This isn't really typical, but it still illustrates the point. This is a very, very rough surface. Like I mentioned, I'm not really going for ultimate perfection here, but this is such a low-hanging fruit. It's just one quick pass with the random orbital sander and the surface will be a lot better. Sure, I could leave it like this, but every time I'd be brushing up against the door, it'd be like getting a light 80 grit sanding. So far, so good. I got the final coat of paint on the doors last night. This morning I used my trusty scraping tool to just clean up the hardwood edges, and I also mounted the door handle again. So yeah, we now have pretty spiffy looking doors. Back when I made the doors, I added this hardwood strip, not for cosmetic reasons, but to make the edges a little bit more hard wearing. Just in case we bump it or something, that hardwood is going to be a lot harder to dent than plywood. The washboards are also coming along nicely. I need one more coat here on the inside, but I can apply that tonight. Before we left Denmark last year, I installed a Fisher Panda 5000i genset. It's been performing really well so far. The fuel pump did die, but that was my fault, so can't really fault Fisher Panda for that. There is one little thing I want to fix though, and that is this task called Quatro genset load limit. The following is a tale of dots that should have been easily connectable, but were not. When we were in Ireland, we had a bunch of rainy days away from shore power. So to charge our batteries, we had to run the genset. And while we were charging the batteries, we did other stuff. Some of the days we would run the oven and maybe one of the burners at the same time. And then we started getting error messages on the little display for the genset. These error messages seemed kinda intermittent. I couldn't really find any logical reason in when we got them. When I saw this error message, I immediately thought, okay, that's probably an issue with our starter battery or the charger. The 5000i doesn't come with an alternator, so use an external charger for charging the starter battery. But after much searching, I found no issues with our DC-DC charger or the starter battery. Thinking that it might be some kind of issue with the genset, I reached out to the wonderful people where we purchased the genset, and they revealed that it was in fact not on the DC side of things there was a low voltage issue. It was on the AC side of things. I just had not realized that we were overloading the genset because of two things. The oven and the cooktop are not constant loads. They cycle on and off, and that's why sometimes we would go 2 or 5 minutes without getting the error message. Our Victron Quatro inverter charger has 2 AC inputs, one for shore power and one for the genset. Our shore power is set up so that we have a little display here at the nav station where we can adjust a limit. Right now it's set to 13 amps. That means if we use more than 13 amps, we're not going to be drawing that from shore power. The inverter is going to kick in and draw that from the batteries. So if we have a load of 15 amps, then it'll take 13 from shore power and 2 from the batteries. With this power assist feature and the genset running, we should be able to whip up something like 8,000 or 9,000 watts worth of angry pixies. And even if we run the battery charger, the oven, the cooktop, the dryer, all that stuff at the same time, we're not pushing 8,000 or 9,000 watts. So, well, that was the other reason why I didn't realize this was an AC issue. But of course, the power assist feature actually requires you to set up the power feature for both inputs. I'd only done it for the one. This should be an easy fix. All we need is a Windows-based laptop and one of these VE bus to USB interfaces. I've connected the interface to our VE bus, which is connected to the inverter charger. We just plug this guy into a USB port. This is Victron Connect. This is the application I used to configure our Quatro with when I installed the Fisher Panda genset, because there are certain settings in here that you're supposed to disable according to Fisher Panda. But let's see if we can find something with current limit. Under General, we have AC input current limiter. Currently that's set to 50 amps. That is way too much for our little genset. So let's bump that down to something like 13 amps. 13 is probably a little bit on the conservative side, but I don't know the exact power factor of our loads here aboard the boat, so I can't really be super precise, and we can always bump it up later. But let's get the genset fired up and see if this current limit works. Just so you know how this is supposed to work, as you can see, we're currently connected to shore power, and we've got juice flowing into the battery because we're consuming less than our current limit. If we then adjust our current limit for our shore power connection, turn it all the way down, then we should see the inverter come on. So let's get that turned down. There's the click, and inverter is on. As you can see up here, we're no longer connected to shore power, and we are also no longer charging the battery from our shore power connection. And in fact, you can see energy is flowing from the battery into the inverter for our AC loads. Being able to set the current limit for the shore power connection directly on that little display is super useful in case you end up in a marina with a not so super duper shore power connection. But let's go ahead and see if our current limit on the AC input from the genset works. And start. Our Quattro has automatically detected that the genset has started and has switched to that instead of shore power. So now we just got to turn on enough stuff that we consume more than 13 amps, which maybe we should have set the limit lower for this test, but let's turn some stuff on. We'll turn the oven on. Let's also boil some water, and we'll also run the dryer. As you can see right now, we have 5,000 watts worth of AC loads, and we are assisting, so we are taking the 2,700 watts from the genset and adding a little bit from the batteries. And the load on the genset remains a little bit over 50%. We'll turn off the genset and jump back on shore power. That was what? All of 30 seconds worth of configuration? I'm pretty sure if the error message on the little display had said something with AC, like AC voltage low, then I would instantly have made the connection to us overloading the genset. But it didn't, and that led to many an evening worth of head scratching. It may have been a bumpy road to get there, but the fix was quick and easy, and we can now close this task. The next morning, with the final coat of paint on the washboard secured, I installed the little lock handle thingy that allows us to lock the boat while we're not aboard. I also gave the edges a light sanding to clean them up and to make the washboards more comfortable to handle. Ta-da! We yet again have functional washboards. I'm really glad I could reuse this little piece of hardware here. It allows us to lock up the boat with just an ordinary padlock, and it's a simple, lightweight mechanism. That takes care of the doors and washboards task. Now for something completely different that I forgot to put a task on the board for. In a couple of days, there is a level 4 national emergency here in the UK. Temperatures in London are supposed to reach into the 40 degrees Celsius area, and here where I am, they're supposed to be in the mid 30 degrees Celsius. That is way too warm for me. We don't have air conditioning aboard the boat yet. Fingers crossed for soonish, but we don't have it yet. So I figured the next best thing we could do was to install a bunch of these 12-volt fans. These are very common. I've seen them aboard tons of boats. There are two brands that are very popular. There's either the Hella one or the other one, which I can't remember what's called. But yeah, we could only get the Hella ones here in Europe, so those are the ones I've gone with. I kind of feel like Hella missed a little bit of an opportunity with these fans, because as you can see, the cable for the fan here is just flapping around out in the breeze. But the mount for the fan here is hollow. I had one of these fans aboard Obelix, and on that one the cable was just loose, and every once in a while that cable would get into contact with the blades on the back of the fan. It wouldn't hurt the cable, but it would make this annoying grrrr sound. By drilling a hole through the mount, there's no longer any loose cable flapping about, and it also looks a lot neater. And of course you can shorten the amount of cable depending on how much you want to be able to move this thing. Please excuse the unfinished headliner up here. We'll get to that eventually, but for now it is just raw plywood. But this is what the fan looks like mounted, and it works. Now I can sit here and edit without getting heat stroke. With the fan at the nav station, I got lucky and the cable that's attached to the fan was long enough. But I've also mounted two fans in the forward cabin, one on either side of the bed and one on my side of the bed. And there I did have to elongate the cable. Whenever I need to do wiring here on the boat, I use a little handy app called Wire Sizer to figure out the gauge of the cable or wires I need. You can get the same information in paper form, but I really like this little app. All you do is input the voltage, the watts, and the circuit length, and then it'll tell you what voltage drop you'll have for any given gauge of wire. These fans only use 6 or 7 watts, so even for our longest run here, we could get away with using 0.75 square millimeter cable, but the smallest gauge I tend to use here aboard Athena is 1.5 square millimeters. For these fans, this is way overkill, but then we can use this little chart here to, for any given gauge of wire, figure out what's the biggest size of fuse we can get away with. Like I said, these fans only draw 6 or 7 watts, so I'll just slap a 1 amp fuse on there and that'll be plenty fine. For these fans, yes, it's overkill to go through all of that checking, but in case you're wiring up something that draws more power, like some kind of pump or, well, a fridge or whatever, then it is well worth it to check the app and the chart just to make sure you don't get into trouble. To solder the wires together without having a third hand, I like to just split each into 2 and then twist them together. Not because of any mechanical reasons or anything like that, just so everything stays put until it's soldered. I think a good location for the 4th and final fan for now is going to be over here by the settee. That's going to be nice when we're chilling on the settee, but also for when we're sleeping while underway. Well, that was a torturous, sweaty mess, but the 4th and final fan is hooked up. Now, I know I forgot to make a task for this, but just to get a little bit of sense of accomplishment here, I'm gonna put a new task over in done. My hopes for next week is that I can install the new drive unit. I'm gonna have to modify our installation a little bit. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with our installation, but I've just figured out a little bit of a better way to do it. So that is hopefully on the to-do list next week. But if we're gonna have that heat wave, I don't know how productive I'm gonna be. So yeah, we'll see. If I manage to modify the drive unit installation next week, I'd also like to make a new cowling to cover the drive unit. I made version 1 in Gosport this winter, but that was a little bit too big and clunky. I think we can do better, and I've ordered some 6mm plywood and some fiberglass and epoxy. Now, if it's too warm to do any of that stuff, well then I do have a bunch of smaller tasks up on the board, so yeah, we'll see. Anyway, I hope to see all of you guys back here aboard Athena next week for yet more DIY fun. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you!